Hello, and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janizewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing?
Doing great, Eric. How are things down in Middletown?
Doing well. But these last couple of days was a case of be careful what you wish for. Last week, we were saying how we'd had a mild winter, and half the country got hit with ice storms and record low temperatures over the last couple of days. In fact, at the top of Mount Washington in New Hampshire, they hit negative 108 degrees, a new record for anywhere in the United States.
That was pretty amazing. Was Fahrenheit? That was Fahrenheit too, right? Not just wind chill.
Yeah, no, that was standard Fahrenheit, not including the wind chill.
Wow. Glad I wasn't up there.
Yeah, no kidding. That was my first thought was it's a good thing nobody lives up there. Yeah.
Oh, so, but yeah, we in Connecticut we've been lucky all winter long. We just had one shovelable thing in December, and but we did get down when I got up Saturday morning. It was -7 with the wind chill and the -20s, and by yesterday afternoon and today it's back in the 40s, and for the next week and a half, the 10-day forecast, it's still going to be warmer than normal. So perhaps we'll
Yeah,
have a really snowy March. I don't know.
I don't know, but it's been a very strange year. Friday evening, I went to check the temperature and there wasn't any. Yeah.
So
So LinkedIn has come up with a new survey, and they do this periodically. And for the last five or six surveys they've done, the results have not changed. The one skill that most job seekers are lacking is communications. And we now live in a world where people are giving presentations constantly, either in person, by Zoom, talks on the phone, teleconferences. So, we are going to look at what it takes to do a good presentation. And the one thing that always seems to be lacking is that the first thing people have to remember is that to do a good presentation, it's the same rule as how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice.
yeah, practice and obviously doing a good job putting your talk together. I know years ago, the book that's out there that is kind of like the bio for this stuff in a lot of ways is Talk Like TED, 9 Public Speaking Tips by Carmen Gallo. And TED Talks is a series where people basically they just go up and it's they have like regional things and then they have like a national thing, I guess, where you can make some money by doing this, but it's keeping it short and there's tips for making things interesting. And so a lot of those tips are very, very appropriate if you're in the job market or anything else. And it's just really, really important to do your preparation to begin with. And so I think that that's
Absolutely.
something.
You need to prep. And what you just said bears repeating. You said in the job market, people don't tend to think about all the times they need to do a presentation. And a job interview is a presentation of a type.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of folks out here, we talk about networking and so on and so forth. Really, really important to plan your 30-second pitch, which includes your benefits of what you're doing and a specific ask. And if you can parlay that into just writing down the points for your 30-second presentation, that will help you out if you're going into the job market and for other things. And obviously, if you're doing a content thing, it's the same thing. Just start writing down the points that you're looking to get across, prioritize them, and just come up with the highlights. I mean, Ted Fox recommends just coming up if you're doing a short to medium sized talk. What are the three biggest takeaway points from that? So, what are the three biggest ways that you want to impress your audience or impress the person that you're interviewing with, the things that that person is going to remember you by.
Absolutely. And you're talking about short talks. A TED talk is 18 minutes. So many of us are used to sitting through hour-long presentations. And one of the worst things that ever happened to presentations was PowerPoint. Because we've all sat through 45-minute, hour-long presentations where somebody gets up on stage and reads PowerPoint slides. And in some cases, they'll actually hand you the presentation before they start. And I actually love when presenters do that, because within 5 minutes, all they're doing is reading the presentation. You have it in your hand. And what I've always done is left, because I've got the presentation. I don't need to hear somebody else read it. So I've just gotten back an hour in my day. But as a presenter, that's really not what you want people to be doing.
No, absolutely not. I mean, for PowerPoint presentations, one of they go over this in detail in the book, and I know that you do presentations, I do presentations, and I know that I tend to ramble on. That's never happened in one of these podcasts. I'm just kidding, but I tend to ramble on. And the thing about slideshows is the recommends here contain no more. This is for a TED Talk. Contain no more than 10 slides, last no more than 20 minutes, and use a font size up to 30 points, no less than 30 points. But what's most importantly is that the slideshow should be you. In other words, all it's going to do is guide you. If you're just reading slides for 20 minutes, just as you said, you have the presentation in front of you, you can walk out. So what I have learned to do is just have a couple of talk points up on a slide. The less words you have down there, I think it has like a limit as far as how many different words you should have on a slide, how many different things, don't have them too busy and so on and so forth. But if you're just using that as a guide, what I like to do if I'm making copies of the highlights of my presentation, I keep them until the end of the meeting. And I say, you can have these takeaways. You don't have to take notes. You can listen to me during this presentation, and I will give this to you at the end so that you can take this home with you. And this is, you and I both teach people how to do presentations and have done a whole bunch of things in networking and so on and so forth. And if you want to keep people engaged, that's the most important thing. But if you're reading something, that's not going to keep them engaged. You got to try and be as interesting as you possibly can, engage your audience, uses several different things. Make sure that you give them the opportunity to ask questions either during the presentation or at the end. So there's a lot of different pointers there. And, one of the nice things about this book is it does cover every different instance. But engaging the audience is the most important thing if you want to be a good speaker. But obviously, if you're talking one-on-one with somebody, it's the same thing. You got to go in there prepared, keep it interesting. If you're going for an interview and so on and so forth, you can do some preparation by learning about the company that you're interviewing with. Maybe put together a little bit of presentation that you looked at for their company and ask them about those things. What about this? What about that? That's just a little tip on that side, but it's all part of your presentation.
Exactly. You need to have your presentation be interactive. And that means not just talking to the audience, but asking them to respond. It's very important that you get them engaged. And I'll give you an example from one of my presentations. I do presentations on networking. And the first thing I do when I start the presentation is I ask, okay, how many of you consider yourself introverts? And a couple of people will usually raise their hand. And then I'll follow up with the second question. Okay, how many of you consider yourself introverts, but were too shy to raise your hand the first time I asked this question? And not only will I get more hands raised, but I'll get them laughing usually. And at that point, they're engaged. So now they're listening. And that's key in a job interview. You need to be able to ask intelligent questions as well as answer them. When you're doing a presentation via Zoom or on the phone, You need to have some sort of feedback. So that can be questions. With Zoom, you've got um, ways for them to raise their hand. When it's depending on the size of the group, usually it's best if it's especially a large group, you want to leave questions till the end. But if it's a small group, let them ask questions during or break into your presentation several times to say, does anybody have any questions? Especially if you're talking about a complex topic.
Yeah, and obviously, if you're using Zoom, the other thing, if it is a larger group, is you can have them put uh, their questions in the chat box and just say you'll get to that more towards the end of the meeting and so on. But as far as you're talking to people, as far as being introverts and so on and so forth, the first thing you brought up today, which is really the most important thing, is practicing. And by practicing that, not this isn't your talk, but just asking them that, by practicing that, immediately they know that you're just natural, just like they are. You're just engaging the audience that way. So part of what you need to practice is not just being technical and so on, but just being yourself and engaging and being natural out there, because people will really see right through you if all you're out there is to just, do this in really, really boring fashion. People want to be engaged, and that's so important. And obviously that's a great way to do that. I mean, when I start networking meetings, which I think I've talked about this before, if I have a room full of networkers there, 40 or 50 people, I'll say, okay, how many people came here today trying to sell the room? And a lot of people are going to raise their hands saying, wow, there's 50 people here and everybody's going to want to buy something. And I said, well, the bad news is that people don't bring their shopping carts to go to networking meetings. I said, how many of you people came here today to actually buy something? And nobody's going to raise their hand. And I say, how many people are here today to meet people? And that way you get them engaged and you can walk them through the fact that your purpose of networking meetings is to start to developing relationships. And that's when the great stuff happens. And it doesn't happen at this meeting because you got to trust people to give them referrals. So your goal is really to get people interested enough in you to say, hey, let's go get some coffee to get to know each other. And then when you get to know these people, when somebody needs or wants something that somebody that has that, that's when you can reach out to them with a referral, because knowing, liking, and trusting is so important. And it starts with the engagement.
Absolutely. You have to engage people. And if you are giving a talk on a topic, people are there to get the information on that topic. I can't count the number of presentations I have turned off, the number of webinar I have shut off because the topic was something I was interested in. It's a 45-minute to an hour long presentation, and 20 minutes in, they're still introducing themselves and they haven't gotten to the information yet. You have to be aware of what the audience is expecting. Why are they there? Like you just said with networking events, people aren't there to buy, so why would you go to sell? You have to know why the audience is there. And if the audience is there to get information on a topic, spending a third of the time or even more talking about yourself, just introducing, that's not going to hold their attention. You need to speak to them, not at them.
Yeah, absolutely. Another tip, if you're giving a presentation on some materials, is if you can weave some storytelling into that, as far as an actual situation where what you're talking about was put to use, or maybe even better, your own story about things that have been going on. And I know that you interweave this into your talks a whole lot. It really, really helps out a lot too. If you put it into storytelling instead of just trying to educate and preach and so on and so forth, that's another way of engaging people.
Yeah, storytelling is very powerful, not just because it's easier to understand, but it gives us concrete example that the audience can look at. If you're dealing with a complicated topic, most tech topics for a general audience, if you can tell a story about it, it helps them understand it, and that also engages them. It's something they can identify with because as you're telling the story, they can envision themselves as being part of that story.
Yeah, if they realize that you're real just like they are, it goes a long way to making them feel comfortable.
Absolutely. And you that's something you want to make sure you're doing is, aside from being authentic and you're engaging that audience, you want to make sure you're keeping things simple. You don't want to talk over the head of your audience. You need to know what their expertise level is. If you're talking about programming to a group of programmers, you can get pretty technical. But if you're talking about using software to a bunch of folks that have never seen that software package, you need to make things as simple as possible. And in fact, Google has a rule within their company when they are giving presentations. They are only allowed to use images on their slides. They can't use bullet points. They can't use detailed descriptions. They've got to break everything down to an image so that it's as simple as possible. And you want people to be able to follow along. And a great formula for this when you're giving a talk is you start by telling them what you're going to tell them. You give a quick overview about what they're going to learn from that talk. Then you give the talk. You actually tell them what you're telling them. And that's where you'll go into your details, and that's where they'll learn. And then before you go to Q&A, you review and you tell them what you already told them, because that repetition helps them absorb the information.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is just starting to talk strongly, get engaging them right off the bat. And so the tips here says the beginning of your presentation is crucial. You got to grab the attention and hold it. They'll give you a few minutes grace to entertain them, but you got to start strong. And basically, strong does not mean going over your whole biography for the first 10 minutes of the talk to tell people all your qualifications and so on and so forth. Chances are, if they're coming to see you, that's going to be in the promo anyway. But just get out there and be yourself. Make eye contact with them, engage them, and smile, and just make them feel comfortable.
Yeah, the comfort level is important, because if people are judging you, they're not paying attention to what you're talking about. And something else that you need to do relatively quickly is to build credibility. Now, if you've written a book, if you're doing podcasts, if you are known as an expert in this, you've got that credibility already. But if you don't, you need to either establish your credibility very quickly, or there's a technique that you can borrow credibility. And that's done by starting off with quotes from a credible source, or quoting information from a reliable research where the data is has the credibility. But you have, either way, whether you're relying on your own credibility or the credibility of the information you're presenting, you need to establish credibility quickly. Because if you get 10 minutes in and people start going, oh, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, you've already lost them. And once you lose an audience, it's very hard to get them back.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned quotes, and that's one of the things that I love to use in my talks, especially since I'm talking about motivational things, because there are quotes that I use oftentimes that go way back to Cicero and Galileo and all these other people. And I always, to engage the audience, I said, I had to put these quotes in because I don't want to try and make them up myself, and these guys are too good anyway. So it's a good way to preface, what you're doing. But it's a great way to get the point across. And sometimes I include the quotes in my takeaways that I give to people, because those are good things to just plaster here, plaster there. A lot of them are just to give you self-confidence and things like that. Put things in really, really simple perspective when things are complicated out there. But that's a really, really great way to do things, is to use other people's material. And that does establish your credibility, because if you don't have it yourself and you're using other people's out there, your audience is going to know that you put in a whole lot of work to put this presentation together. You're not just sitting out here talking.
Right. It shows you've done the research. And ironically, many speakers are hesitant to use other people's quotes, other people's data. They think they have to do everything themselves. And that's simply not true. You always have to attribute where you got the data, who said the quote. But there's nothing wrong with using somebody else's information. Obviously, you're not going to use somebody else's complete presentation. You need to make it your own. But when you're reading business books, very often you will see in the books that they are quoting from other people's books. They'll say such and such, who is an expert in organization and wrote XYZ book. That doesn't diminish your credibility because you're relying on someone else. It shows you've done the research. It shows you're taking this seriously, and it helps your audience take you seriously.
Yeah, using books actually increases your credibility. I do that a lot in my slideshows. I'll actually have the cover of a book on the slide and tell people this is a book that you really need to get to read. I got a lot of things out of this, and I always am very happy to share reading lists with people because nobody knows everything, and we all learn things by learning from other people. I mean, we've talked in the past as far as the habit of reading books every day and doing other types of personal development. It's not just for you, it's to share with other people. I mean, that's what this is all about. So it's really, really important to do that. And I love using those as templates for in my talks as far as what people, if they want to get more information on this, get this book, get The Habits of Highly Effective People, other things like that. It's really, really important.
Right. And as you said earlier, you're pulling information from Talk Like TED. And TED Talks are known to be very professional speaking engagements. People always are engaged in them, inspired by them. So learning to talk like that and using the book Talk Like TED is a great resource for learning your own. The other, and of course, there's a number of books, but legendary presenter was Steve Jobs. And there are many books that talk about how to do a presentation like Steve Jobs did. And it was all about knowing the information, being engaging, and practice, practice, practice. Do your presentation in a mirror, talk in a mirror, invite a few people to see your presentation and get feedback from it. No matter how many times you do a presentation, there's always room for improvement. And of course, the information on the topic can change over time. I've done presentations on social media. I don't think I've ever done exactly the same presentation twice because the technology behind social media changes so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. In the book Talk Like TED, it says it's 9 public speaking secrets. We've talked about a few of them so far: passion, storytelling, having a conversation, and so on. Section number 2 has 3 different points about not being novel. And point number 1 is to teach people something new, something unfamiliar that they weren't expecting to learn at this. The second one was really interesting, and whether I don't know if you're going to have an opportunity to put this into your own presentations, but if you do, it's fun. It says deliver jaw-dropping moments. And one of the people that he referenced who did a TED Talk was Bill Gates. And in that, he was talking about the danger. You know, Bill Gates did a whole lot of things environmentally and things like that. He wanted to make a point about the dangers of malaria. He brought in a jar of mosquitoes, and Gates said, malaria is, of course, transmitted by mosquitoes. I brought some here just so you could experience this. We'll let these roll around the auditorium a little bit. There's no reason only poor people should have the experience. And then he did, obviously the mosquitoes weren't malaria expected, but it's a jaw-dropping moment. If you went to Disney theaters a long, long time ago and you're watching a movie about, I can't remember which animated movie it was, but they had these things under your seats that actually started touching your legs when you thought mice were going through the room and the whole audience started screaming and so on. So if you can put something into your talk that's jaw dropping, that's really fun to do too. Obviously, not all people are going to be able to do that, but it also talks about lightening up, not to take themselves or the topic too seriously, because you always know that the speaker's probably passionate about what they're talking about, but they could be so passionate and so on and so forth that it's overkill. And what it's really, really important to do if you want to keep the audience engaged is you just keep it lightened up. And I know that I get off on these tangents because I'm very passionate about, the personal development and positivity and so on and so forth. And hopefully most of the time it just comes out as being part of me. But if you get too crazy on that stuff, then people are going to get turned off also. So
Yeah, and that's very important to remember, is that even audiences that are on your side can be put off if you're too over the top. And actually, there was just two very strong examples of that just a few weeks ago at Davos, at the World Economic Forum. Both Al Gore and John Kerry did presentations on global warming and climate change. Now, this was a very receptive audience, but both of them were criticized for being so over the top and so ridiculous that even the people that agreed with them couldn't take their presentation seriously. So you have to be careful. As passionate as you can be about a topic, you have to be able to talk to the audience and not come off as a cartoon character.
yeah, or come off as coming down to them,
Yeah,
especially if you're talking to a group of people who really know that are in the same space that you are in. If you go over the top with them and you're talking down to them and they think you have your own agenda behind it and so on and so forth, it's just not going to work. I mean, the purpose for you to be there is to just be engaging, get your point across to people, answer their questions, be real, just like they are. People want to be treated as equals, have fun, and that's what it's all about.
exactly. And we are actually coming up on the end of our time. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway that people should remember before they start their presentations?
Well, what I would get this book or just download the key points that we just talked about. But practice is really, really important, and not just the material, but your delivery, being natural. It's really, really important to put the whole package together and just be engaged and realize that your audience is there to have a conversation with you and to learn. And the better time that they have as far as their own comfort level while they're there, the more memorable you are going to be.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, practice is definitely key. I think another key point that I want everybody to remember is be engaging. Talk with the audience, not to them. It's important that they're in on the joke, so to speak. You want them to come along with you. A presentation is a journey from start to finish, and you want them to be on the journey with you. You don't want to lose them part of the way through. So practice what you're doing, know your topic, but have fun with it. Relax and let people know who you are. Be authentic. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us each episode at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.